Something that I found so frustrating when I was first healing from childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, was I would see people without a traumatized nervous system putting down boundaries like it was second nature. It came so easily to them. And even if the other person had a terrible reaction, maybe they got mad, maybe they got disappointed, they were still able to enforce their boundary. And so after I learned that boundaries actually are healthy, they're not selfish, they don't make me a bad person, and then I would see their example, I would then go to imitate it. And it did not happen for me the way it did with them. And tell me if this resonates in the comment section. But I would go into a full-fledged panic attack. My body would be acting as if I were battling a grizzly bear. I would be full of shame. I would then act in a way I was like, who is this person inhabiting my body? And then afterwards, wind up caving in, disrespecting my own boundary, and doing what the other person wanted. It was horrible. So if that resonates with you, you're going to want to watch this video, because first I'm going to explain why boundaries are so hard. And it's so important we understand this, because if we don't, it feeds the belief there's something wrong with me. And we don't want to do that. We're also going to learn about 7 different types of boundaries. I used to think it was as simple as, oh, I just have to say no. Well, there's more to it. So we're going to go over that. And then I'm going to give you some really awesome tips to help you to start building your capacity to enforce boundaries. So let's dive in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom every week, and I do the inner work with survivors from all over the world of childhood trauma together. Here on my YouTube channel, we talk about what healing is about, what it looks like, the symptoms of unhealed trauma. But in the School of Transformation, we do the inner healing together. So if you're ready to take the next step, make sure you join me weekly on Zoom. So let's start with why boundaries are so difficult to put down. And I really hope that by the end of this section, you realize that this has nothing to do with you being weak or having something wrong with you. The reality is that if you grew up in an environment that was not safe, or in an environment that was unpredictable, or maybe mom loved you Monday, but Tuesday, absolutely nothing changed, and mom acts like she can't stand you. Right? So there were constantly changing rules, constant confusion where you didn't know what to expect, either dynamics. In those types of environments, boundaries aren't just discouraged, they're outright dangerous. For example, if you had a caregiver that anytime you set a boundary, they got extremely angry and then emotionally punished you in one way, shape, or form, where maybe they just ignored you, or treated you like you were invisible or dead, right? They gave you the silent treatment, or they screamed, shouted, and shamed you. Then your nervous system learned that setting a boundary leads to conflict. And when you're a child, conflict with your caregivers feels like you can be abandoned and your life is on the line. Or maybe your parents taught you conditional love. So they only gave you love when you were being agreeable, when you agreed 100% with them, when you aligned 100% with them. Well, then you learned that boundaries cause disconnection. And in childhood disconnection, again, it all boils down to safety. If I'm disconnected from my caregivers, who's going to take care of me because I'm too young to take care of myself? Or one other scenario could be that, unfortunately, maybe you were assigned the role of peacemaker, where you were sadly trained that it was your job to make everyone else feel better in order for everyone to feel safe. Then what happens as an adult is that as soon as there's a difference in opinion, as soon as there's a need for a boundary, you might instinctually just go into a freeze response because it reminds you of your childhood. Regardless, all 3 of those scenarios have one thing in common. They trained your nervous system to equate boundaries with danger. So in other words, when we start learning that boundaries are healthy and that we're allowed to put them down, and we take steps to do so, our body responds in such a way to stop us because it thinks it's protecting us. Just like if suddenly I learned that touching a hot stove is safe. Obviously, it's not, right? I know this on such a deep cognitive level that it feels and sounds ridiculous to even think about trying to teach my body something different. Well, the body feels that way about the mind in regards to boundaries. And that's why, even though boundaries really are healthy behavior, your body might treat them like a threat. And so, setting a boundary might make your heart race, your throat tighten, or your stomach churn. Again, this has nothing to do with being weak. It's simply that your nervous system is protecting you from what used to be truly unsafe. But the key is, that was then, and this is now. And now we can start teaching our body that boundaries are not the enemy, rather the doorway to safety. Before I get into how to start setting them, I want to quickly mention the different kinds of boundaries that we need to strengthen and develop. And I say this because, to me, again, in my lack of personal experience in childhood, in my lack of having any kind of reference as far as healthy boundaries, to me, I simplified it as just saying no. I just had to learn to say no. Well, that's true. And there are different types of boundaries, and it's good to notice the differences so that we can have balance in so many different areas of our life. The first one is physical boundaries, and this can have to do with our personal space and our physical well-being. This makes me think of, recently, my husband and I were visiting some friends, and their 3-year-old daughter came out who doesn't really know us. We hadn't really formed a bond with her at that time because they live far away, right? So the mom was saying, hey, just give him a hug, give, my husband a hug. And the daughter, you could see her whole body tighten, and she was like, I don't want to. And the parents, wanting to teach respect to their daughter, was like, just give him a hug. You don't want him to feel sad, right? And so I stepped in and I was like, you know what? If she doesn't feel comfortable, that's okay. And I asked her, I was like, do you want a high five? And she got super excited and gave us a nice high five. Now, the reason I'm sharing this scenario with you is because, as a parent, I know that if we don't know how to have boundaries with ourselves, we can accidentally create scenarios where our children think that they need to override their own inner feelings in order to make someone else happy. And we don't want to do that. Now, obviously, there's a fine line between respect and crossing boundaries, but that just came to mind when I was saying this. Number 2 has to do with emotional boundaries, which have to do with protecting your feelings. For example, I know that when you've been brought up without boundaries, you tend to be everyone's therapist, right? Not willingly, but I should say everyone makes you their therapist, and then you think that you have to make them happy. There's that childhood coping skills coming up, right? And so you might be the one that everyone comes to and listen, and you have to listen and listen and listen. And you find yourself listening for hours. Meanwhile, you're being drained, right? So there's the emotions in you that aren't feeling good that you may not notice or be putting a boundary around. So we have to start listening to what feels good emotionally and what doesn't, and responding to them. Because the truth is that if we don't respect our own boundaries, we can't expect anyone else to. And I know one of the biggest mistakes that I went through when I was learning about boundaries was I was going to go explain to the world these new boundaries that I had, because if I explained them, then people would respect them. Yeah, that doesn't happen, because those were my words. But if I still sat there and listened to the point where I felt drained, my actions were saying a whole different story. So the first person that we need to make sure is respecting our boundaries is ourselves. Number 3 has to do with time boundaries, guarding your time and commitments. So if you have a commitment, even if it's just with yourself, and somebody asks you to do something, honoring our time is being able to say, I'm unable to do that. I wish I could help you, but I have a prior commitment. And honoring the things that not just are important to other people, but that are important to ourselves as well. Number 4 are mental boundaries. Protecting your thoughts and beliefs and giving yourself permission to have your own personal perspective. If you had unhealthy dynamics where the other person, whether it was a parent or a significant other made you feel like their way or the highway, or everyone had to have the same exact opinion and you were punished if you didn't, then this one is a challenge, because learning how to put down boundaries is about breaking that way of thinking and giving people permission to have their own perspective, even if you don't like it, and staying true to your perspective, even if others don't like it either. Number 5 is energetic boundaries, being mindful of what restores your energy and what drains your energy, and then respecting that. So if being on social media and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling leaves me drained, then I want to notice that and take steps to respect my energetic boundaries. If being around a person's negative energy doesn't feel good, then if possible, I'd like to limit my time around that person. If I have to be around that person for whatever reason, I want to make sure there's an energetic boundary where I can feel that negative energy, right? Most of us are empaths. We can feel that, but we don't allow that to be our energy. We learn how to really decipher where one person's energy ends and ours begins. Now, I know with myself, that one took time to work on because of my personal dynamics in my family system. I kind of felt like I was a thermostat tuning into whatever energetic temperature of the people around me. So if they were at this level, I could match it. If they were down here, I absorbed it. I was never in my own energy. I was just absorbing everyone's around me. So it took some time to break out of that habit or that coping skill from childhood. So if that one's a hard one and you're like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that, make sure you keep watching, because I am going to give you some really good tips that are going to help towards the end. Number 6 is spiritual boundaries, being able to respect your opinions and the opinions of others, even if they differ. And number 7 has to do with sexual boundaries. Now, most of you are probably thinking, Michele, I would never cross anyone else's sexual boundaries. However, if you were trained that boundaries make you bad and that you're going to be abandoned, sometimes a person might fall into sexual fawning, where they don't want to be involved with a person sexually, but this fear of abandonment wakes up and causes them to engage in behaviors that they really don't want to do. So those are 7 different types of boundaries that we really want to strengthen in our life. And I'd be curious to know which ones you've noticed that you would like to work on. So make sure you let me know in the comment section below so that we can encourage each other. And I do want to say that oftentimes, most of us, if we had any kind of childhood trauma, really struggle, maybe with all of them, but definitely with emotional and energetic boundaries, because oftentimes those were the first to be violated in our childhood. The good news is that we can help our nervous system to learn this healthy behavior of setting boundaries. So let's shift into how we can do that in a way that does not throw us into panic, overwhelm, or emotional dysregulation. Let's first start imagining setting boundaries like building a fence around your property. You may not be able to do it overnight. You simply have to start one plank at a time. Well, it's the same thing with our boundaries. And I know something that we tend to do that can make putting down boundaries even harder is that we tend to go for like the things that are high stake situations or highly activated situations that are challenging. Well, that's like going into the gym and picking the heaviest weights. We haven't worked out in a long time, but we want to get buff, so we're just going to do it that way. No, we're going to get hurt that way. We want to look for areas that are easier to start implementing boundaries. For example, if you're at a store and a cashier starts making small talk with you, but inside you really don't feel like engaging, you can simply nod instead of responding fully. Now, I'm not going to lie, that sounds like a tiny, small thing, but I can't tell you how many times when I was working through the same challenge of learning how to put down boundaries, I would be at a store, small talk would start happening, and inside, like, my mind was on something else. I really didn't want to engage for whatever reason. And it was as if somebody pushed a button, and suddenly I'm like doing everything I can so that that person feels so connected and so good because they shared something with me. So I want to make sure they feel good. And inside I'm watching myself like, what are you doing? Like, why are you acting like this? I was fawning. And it can feel like this automatic button kicks on. Regardless, this is a small place that you can start looking for when that happens and starting to honor how you really feel inside. Another easier situation to start practicing putting down boundaries is with safe people, people that you know love you, right? So let's say a friend calls and asks you for a favor. When you feel that impulse, that kicks on, because that's what it feels like. The fawn response feels like it's almost like your body like wakes up and wants to say yes and wants to do to make them happy without even pausing to consider how you feel, right? When you feel that impulse, pause. And rather than just saying no, because that might be too activating at the moment, start practicing saying, let me check my schedule and I can get back to you. It starts slowing down that automatic default reaction of the fawn trauma response in a safe environment. By doing this, you're starting to learn how to be more firm or to have more firm boundaries without overly waking up the alarm in your nervous system. Something else that's helpful is the way we word things. So learning how to use buffer words to make it easier is really helpful. For some of us trauma survivors, outright saying no or I can't feels terrifying. So a simpler way to say that, you can try, I wish I could, but I don't have the capacity today. Or unfortunately, that doesn't work with my schedule. Now, I want to be honest, even with the buffer words, even with practicing in safe areas, you're going to notice that when you begin to apply this information, your body's going to freak out. I think this is the part that people need to understand more. I know with myself, if I learned something and then I went to put it into practice, especially if it was a healthy behavior, I expected my body to have a healthy reaction. But that's not the case if your body has the story that this healthy behavior is bad or dangerous. So we almost have to expect discomfort, expect anxiety, because if we don't, then we're setting ourselves up for a little bit of an emotional shock that might discourage us to continue strengthening this behavior. And we don't want that to happen. And so working through that discomfort is important. Oftentimes we can view that discomfort as the hurt pieces from the past. Some people use the phrase, our inner child. Regardless, they're the stuck stories, the stuck survival energy of the times when boundaries really were dangerous, right? So it's the old story. Our present day self may fully be capable of understanding that boundaries are good, but on a visceral level, our body feels like boundaries are bad. So we have to learn how to get our mind and our present day self and our body, which is our subconscious mind, working together so that we're not in an arm wrestle with our subconscious mind or our body, trying to force it to do what we want. And that's exactly what I help people to do in the School of Transformation. We learn how to help our mind and our body get on the same page because honestly, they have the same goal, right? They really both just really care about this body and about us. But it's about helping them work together. And that's something that we can't learn our way to do. We have to learn how to embody that. And so I meet live weekly on Zoom with people to help them to learn how to embody everything I teach on my YouTube channels. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you check out the School of Transformation. You can join as a weekly or a yearly member. I'll leave the links here for you to check out and see if it's a good fit for you.